Have you ever tried to justify a deeply held belief, only to find that your reasons boil down to something other than hard evidence? It's a common human experience, but it lies at the heart of a profound philosophical divide. Is it possible for a belief to be both religious and rational? Here we argue that the answer is a resounding no. Faith, by its very definition, is the act of believing without sufficient proof, of taking a leap into the dark. Rationality, on the other hand, is the process of building conclusions on a foundation of verifiable evidence and logical consistency. It's about using a flashlight, not closing your eyes. In this video, we will dissect this fundamental conflict, showing how the core tenets of every major religion rely on claims that are, by any reasonable standard, irrational. It's a bold assertion, but one that stands up to scrutiny. It's a lonely position in many parts of the world, to be sure. In the comments below, let us know where you're watching from, and whether being a rationalist in a world of faith feels like swimming against the current. If you value clear thinking, be sure to like this video and subscribe to the God Mirage. What do we mean by rational? Before we can diagnose any belief as irrational, we must first establish a clear, working definition of rationality. The word itself is often misunderstood, frequently caricatured as a cold, robotic, and emotionless state of being, personified by characters like Star Trek's Mr. Spock. This is a profound misrepresentation. Rationality is not the absence of emotion. It is a method. It is the cognitive toolkit we use to build the most accurate possible model of reality in our minds. A rational belief is one that is well-grounded, one that corresponds, as closely as we can manage, to the way the world actually is. So, what are the components of this toolkit? The first and most crucial element is a commitment to evidentialism. This is a principle elegantly summarized by the 19th century mathematician and philosopher W.K. Clifford, who famously asserted, "It is wrong always, everywhere, and for anyone to believe anything upon insufficient evidence." This isn't just a catchy phrase, it's a profound ethical and intellectual stance. It proposes that the strength of our conviction should be directly proportional to the quality and quantity of the evidence supporting it. Think of it like a detective arriving at a crime scene. A rational detective does not decide immediately that the butler did it based on a gut feeling, or because butlers in stories are often guilty. Instead, she gathers evidence: fingerprints, forensic reports, witness testimonies, security footage. She formulates hypotheses but holds them loosely, ready to discard them the moment contradictory evidence appears. Her belief in the butler's guilt only grows as the evidence accumulates: the muddy boots matching the prints in the garden, the discovery of a motive, the breakdown of his alibi. If overwhelming evidence then points to the gardener, the rational detective, without ego or shame, adjusts her belief to fit the new data. Her goal isn't to be right about her initial hunch. Her goal is to discover the truth. This process of proportional belief is the very essence of rational thought. A second related pillar of rationality is logical consistency. Our web of belief should, as much as possible, be free from internal contradiction. You cannot rationally believe, for instance, that you're sitting in a windowless room and at the same time believe that you are enjoying a view of the ocean from that same room. One of these beliefs must be false. This is the law of non-contradiction, a foundational principle of logic. While human minds are messy and we all hold minor, unexamined contradictions, a rational approach involves actively seeking out and resolving these inconsistencies when they are discovered. A rational person, when confronted with the fact that two of their core beliefs are mutually exclusive, must either discard one, discard both, or demonstrate that the contradiction is merely apparent, not real. They cannot simply hold both contradictory ideas and declare it a mystery. That is not a solution. It is an abdication of the reasoning process. The third and perhaps most powerful tool in the rationalist kit is the principle of falsifiability. Popularized by the philosopher of science Karl Popper, this criterion is what separates science from pseudoscience and rational inquiry from dogmatic assertion. A claim is falsifiable if there is some conceivable observation, some potential piece of evidence that could prove it false. This sounds counterintuitive to some. Don't we want our beliefs to be true and unassailable? But Popper's insight was brilliant. A claim that cannot possibly be proven false is a claim that doesn't actually tell you anything meaningful about the world. Consider the classic example, the statement, "All swans are white." This is a good scientific, falsifiable claim. Why? Because to disprove it, we only need to find one single black swan. When European explorers did in fact discover black swans in Australia, the hypothesis was falsified and our knowledge of the world was improved. Our model of reality became more accurate. Now contrast this with a non-falsifiable claim. Let's imagine I claim there is an invisible, intangible, silent, heatless fairy floating in this room. You pull out a fairy detector and it reads negative. I respond, but this fairy is also undetectable by all forms of technology. You set up fine nets to catch it. I say, it is non-corporeal and passes through all matter. You set up thermal cameras. I say, it has no heat signature. No matter what test you propose, I can simply invent a new property of the fairy that allows it to evade your test. My claim is perfectly safe from disproof. It is unfalsifiable. But what have I actually told you about the world? Nothing. The state of the world with my undetectable fairy in it is completely indistinguishable from the state of the world without it. The claim is empty. A rational mind discards such claims not because they have been proven false, but because they are structured in a way that they cannot be tested. They are, in a word, meaningless. So, to summarize, a rational belief is one that is scaled to the evidence, is logically consistent with one's other beliefs, and is, at least in principle, falsifiable. This is the gold standard we apply, whether consciously or not, to almost every aspect of our lives. We expect this standard from our mechanics, our doctors, our engineers, and our courts of law. The question we must now ask is, can religious belief ever meet this standard? The nature of faith, an epistemological black check. When we turn our attention to religion, we encounter a concept that is presented not merely as a method of belief, but as a profound virtue in and of itself, faith. And it is here at this very juncture that the paths of reason and religion irrevocably diverge. Apologists and sophisticated theologians often attempt to muddy the waters here. They will try to equate religious faith with the kind of everyday trust we just discussed. You have faith that the chair will hold you, they'll say, or faith that the sun will rise tomorrow. Religion just asks for that same kind of faith. This is a deeply disingenuous equivalence. It is a rhetorical sleight of hand designed to borrow the credibility of reason for a system that explicitly rejects it. The faith you have in a chair is not a blind belief. It is a conclusion based on a mountain of evidence. You have past experience with chairs. You understand, perhaps intuitively, some basic principles of physics, material strength, and structural integrity. You can see the chair, touch it, wobble it to test its sturdiness. Your belief that it will hold you is a rational inference based on prior data. Similarly, your faith in the sun rising is based on billions of daily repetitions, a well-understood and thoroughly tested model of celestial mechanics, and an overwhelming amount of observational evidence. If one day astronomers presented powerful, verifiable evidence that the Earth's rotation was ceasing, you would, however, reluctantly abandon your belief in the next sunrise. This is trust based on evidence. Religious faith is a fundamentally different creature. It is not an extension of this process, it is a departure from it. The New Testament itself provides one of the most common and revealing definitions in the Epistle to the Hebrews, chapter 11, verse 1. Now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. Let us pause and analyze that definition. The conviction of things not seen. This is not a description of evidence-based trust. It is, by its own admission, a conviction held in the absence of sensory data or verifiable proof. It is a belief maintained not because of evidence, but in spite of the lack of it. The Christian story of doubting Thomas further lionizes this principle. Thomas, the rationalist of the apostles, refuses to believe in the resurrection until he can physically touch Jesus' wounds. When he is finally granted this proof, Jesus says to him, "Have you believed because you have seen me? Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed." The moral of this story is not subtle. It is a direct statement that belief without evidence, the very definition of irrationality we have established, is not only acceptable but is considered more blessed, more virtuous, than a belief that demands proof. Faith in the religious context is presented as an epistemological virtue. It is the ability to leap across the chasm of uncertainty without the bridge of evidence. Reason demands we proportion our belief to the evidence. Faith demands belief as a prerequisite for, or a substitute for, that evidence. It is, in essence, an epistemological blank check. You are asked to sign on to the conclusion first, that God exists, that a specific holy book is true, that a particular prophet was divine, and then encouraged to interpret the world through that lens, treating any confirming instances as proof and dismissing any contradictions as tests of your faith. This is the complete inversion of the rational process. The detective has decided the butler is guilty from the outset and will now twist every piece of evidence to fit that predetermined conclusion. This isn't a bug in the system of religious belief. It's the central feature. It has to be. Why? Because the core claims of virtually all major religions, the existence of non-physical deities, the occurrence of supernatural miracles, the promise of an unverifiable afterlife, are, by their very nature, extraordinary claims. And as the late, great Christopher Hitchens, channeling David Hume, was fond of reminding us, that which can be asserted without evidence can also be dismissed without evidence. To get around this inconvenient rule of reason, religion had to invent a new rule: faith. It had to create a special privileged pathway to truth that was exempt from the rigorous and often difficult standards of evidentialism and falsifiability. It is a self-sealing argument. How do you know God exists? Through faith. But how do you know your faith is pointing to something real? Because your faith tells you it is. It's a perfectly circular, logically fallacious loop that protects the belief from any and all external critique. It is a declaration that a particular set of ideas is simply not playing by the same rules as every other claim to knowledge. The unfalsifiable and the untouchable. Now that we have a clear understanding of rationality as a process, and of religious faith as a system that operates outside of that process, we can see how this plays out when applied to specific religious claims. The primary mechanisms that insulate these claims from rational scrutiny are the logical fallacy of special pleading and the construction of profoundly unfalsifiable propositions. Special pleading is an argumentative fallacy where a person applies standards, principles, or rules to all other cases, but makes an exception for their own case without providing adequate justification for that exception. It's a way of saying the rules apply to everyone but me. Religion is rife with this. Consider the classic question posed to theists: what created God? The standard response is some variation of, God is eternal. He exists outside of time and space and therefore does not require a creator. He is the uncaused cause. Notice the special exception being carved out. The implicit premise used to argue for God's existence in the first place is often a version of the Kalam cosmological argument. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe has a cause, which is then labeled God. But when the same logic is applied to God himself, a special ad hoc rule is invented just for him. The rule of everything needs a cause does not apply to this one specific entity. There is no valid justification given for this exception. It is simply asserted. Why is the universe not allowed to be eternal but God is? Why can't the initial singularity of the Big Bang be the uncaused cause? The answer is that it would undermine the desired conclusion. So a special exception is created. God is placed in an untouchable metaphysical category, exempt from the very laws of causality that were used to argue for his existence. This is not a sophisticated philosophical move. It is a transparent attempt to shield a preferred belief from the logical consequences it creates. It is moving the goalpost not just a few yards, but into an entirely different dimension where the game has no rules. This leads us directly to the grand problem of unfalsifiability, which we touched on earlier. To truly grasp its corrosive effect on reason, we can turn to some of modern skepticism's most famous thought experiments. The first is Bertrand Russell's celestial teapot. In 1952, the philosopher Bertrand Russell proposed the following. Imagine I were to assert that between the Earth and Mars there is a china teapot revolving about the Sun in an elliptical orbit. He continues that, were he to be careful to add that the teapot is too small to be detected by even our most powerful telescopes, no one could disprove his assertion. But if he were to then say, since my assertion cannot be disproven, it is an intolerable presumption on the part of human reason to doubt it, he would rightly be thought to be talking nonsense. Russell's point is profound. The burden of proof lies with the person making the positive claim. It is not up to the rest of us to disprove the existence of the teapot. It is up to the person claiming its existence to provide positive evidence for it. The inability to disprove a claim is not, and has never been, evidence for its truth. Yet this is precisely the posture adopted by many religious beliefs. The claim God exists is functionally identical to the claim a celestial teapot exists. Both are asserted to exist in a realm that is conveniently beyond our ability to directly verify or falsify. The believer then shifts the burden of proof, asking the skeptic to prove that God doesn't exist, a logical impossibility akin to proving there are no teapots anywhere in the vastness of space. It's a game that is rigged from the start. Carl Sagan, the brilliant astronomer and science communicator, updated this idea with his famous parable of the dragon in the garage. In his book, The Demon-Haunted World, Sagan asks us to imagine that he tells you there is a dragon living in his garage. Naturally, you are excited and want to see it. Ah, says Sagan, but it's an invisible dragon. Okay, you suggest let's spread flour on the floor to capture its footprints. Good idea, Sagan replies, but this dragon floats on the air. Well, let's use an infrared sensor to detect its fire. Sorry, Sagan says, its fire is heatless. Let's spray paint the dragon to make it visible. Unfortunately, he concludes, this dragon is incorporeal and the paint won't stick. Sagan's final question is the devastating one. Now, what's the difference between an invisible, incorporeal, floating dragon who spits heatless fire and no dragon at all? The answer, of course, is that there is no difference. None whatsoever. The dragon claim has been immunized against every possible test. It has been rendered utterly unfalsifiable, and in doing so, it has been rendered meaningless. Substitute God for dragon. God is invisible. God is incorporeal. He leaves no physical trace. He does not speak in a verifiable way. He does not answer prayers with statistically significant, repeatable results. Every single proposed test for God's existence has either failed or been met with a new ad hoc rationalization for why that test was invalid. God works in mysterious ways. He doesn't perform parlor tricks. He won't be tested. These are all just more sophisticated ways of saying, the paint won't stick. These aren't just clever gotchas. They reveal the fundamental structural flaw in religious epistemology. The concepts of God, souls, heaven, hell, and divine intervention are almost without exception formulated in precisely this unfalsifiable manner. They are celestial teapots and garage dragons on a grand cosmological scale. This is the very heart of why religious belief is irrational. It's not necessarily that the claims are false, though they may be, but that they are not even in the realm of being rationally debatable. They are built on a foundation of special pleading and shielded by the armor of unfalsifiability. We've all encountered these kinds of claims not just about gods, but about ghosts, alternative medicine, or political conspiracies. These belief systems often use the exact same tactics. What's the most common or frustrating example of special pleading or an unfalsifiable claim you've personally come across? Share your experience in the comments below. It helps to see just how universal these patterns of flawed thinking really are. But what about personal experience? At this point, a defender of faith might concede these philosophical points. They might agree that the logical arguments are porous and the claims are unfalsifiable. But they will often pivot to what they consider their trump card, the unassailable fortress of their belief: personal, subjective experience. I have felt the presence of God, they will say. I prayed for a miracle, and it happened. The intellectual arguments don't matter because I know it's true in my heart. This is, without question, the most powerful and persuasive argument for belief on an individual level. It feels deeply, profoundly real, and we should not be so quick to dismiss the sincerity of a person reporting the experience. They are almost certainly not lying. They genuinely felt something powerful. The error is not in the feeling, but in the interpretation. The crucial mistake is leaping from "I had an intense, emotional, and inexplicable experience" to the highly specific conclusion, "Therefore, the creator of the universe, as described in my particular holy book, personally intervened in my life." That is a gargantuan leap of logic, a leap across a canyon of unexamined assumptions. The human mind is not a perfect, pristine mirror reflecting reality. It is a pattern-seeking, agency-detecting, storytelling machine that evolved for survival on the African savanna, not for discerning the metaphysical truths of the cosmos. Our brains are riddled with cognitive biases that make subjective experience a notoriously unreliable guide to objective truth. We are all susceptible to confirmation bias, the tendency to favor and recall information that confirms our pre-existing beliefs. If you believe a benevolent God is watching over you, you will remember the one time you narrowly avoided a car accident as a miracle, while forgetting the thousands of times you drove safely without incident, and tragically ignoring the millions who die in accidents, despite their fervent prayers. We have a hyperactive agency detection system. Our ancestors were better off assuming the rustle in the grass was a lion rather than the wind. The cost of a false positive, thinking there's a predator when there isn't, was low, while the cost of a false negative was death. This has left us with a deep-seated tendency to attribute intention and consciousness, agency, to random events. That feeling of being watched, that sudden, inexplicable shiver. The brain's default setting is to look for a mind, a ghost, a spirit, or a God behind the curtain. Furthermore, we are emotional reasoners. Powerful feelings can convince us that our thoughts are true regardless of evidence. The awe one feels looking at a starry sky, the comfort one feels during a church service, the catharsis of a tearful prayer, these are real and potent human emotions. But they are not evidence for the supernatural. Awe is an understandable reaction to cosmic scale. Comfort is a product of community and ritual. Catharsis is a psychological release. Attributing these feelings to a divine source is adding an unnecessary and unproven layer of explanation. People feel the same awe at a rock concert. They find the same comfort in a secular support group. Atheists are moved to tears by a beautiful piece of music. The experiences are human, not divine. And let us not forget, people have equally powerful personal experiences that convince them they have been abducted by aliens, spoken to the ghost of their grandmother, or that their lucky crystals are healing them. We rightly demand more than their sincere, personal testimony in those cases. Rationality requires that we apply the same standard to religious experience. The utility belt of belief: morality, meaning, and motivated reasoning. Faced with the failure of logic and the unreliability of experience, the final retreat for the apologist is often the argument from utility. The claim shifts. Perhaps we can't prove that it's true, the argument goes, but believing it is beneficial. It makes people moral. It gives life meaning. Society would collapse without it. This is an argument not for the truth of a belief, but for its usefulness. And here again, the position is far weaker than it appears. First, let's dismantle the ancient canard that morality comes from religion. This idea was elegantly dispatched over 2,000 years ago by Plato in his dialogue, The Euthyphro. He presents a philosophical pincer move from which there is no clean escape. The question is this: is something moral because God commands it, or does God command it because it is, in itself, moral? Consider the implications. If something is moral simply because God commands it, then morality is entirely arbitrary. If God were to command us to torture children, then under this framework, torturing children would become a morally good act. This makes God a cosmic tyrant and renders the word good meaningless, reducing it to whatever the boss says. Most believers, quite rightly, recoil from this conclusion. So they are forced onto the other horn of the dilemma. God commands things because they are already moral. But this is an even more devastating concession for theism. If goodness is a standard that exists independently of God, a standard that even God himself must look to for guidance, then God is no longer the source of morality. He becomes at best a divine middleman, a cosmic messenger passing on moral truths that exist with or without him. We can therefore access this morality ourselves by using the same tools God presumably uses: reason, empathy, and an understanding of well-being and harm. Secular humanism has long argued that morality is grounded in our shared nature as social, sentient beings. We can derive a robust ethical framework from the simple premise that the suffering of conscious creatures is bad, and their flourishing is good. We do not need a divine book filled with Bronze Age ethics on slavery and the subjugation of women to teach us that. Then there is the question of meaning. Without God, the believer asks, what is the point of it all? This question reveals more about the questioner than about reality. It presumes that meaning must be something handed down from on high, a cosmic purpose assigned to us like a chore. But is an assigned meaning truly more profound than one we create ourselves? An artist does not find her work meaningful because a celestial king told her to paint. She finds it meaningful through the act of creation itself, through the struggle, the expression, the connection with others. A scientist finds meaning in peeling back one more layer of nature's mystery. A parent finds meaning in raising a child to be a kind and happy person. To suggest that these self-generated, human-centric sources of meaning are somehow inferior to a pre-packaged divine plan is, frankly, an insult to the human spirit. It is the argument that a life lived as a puppet in a cosmic play is more meaningful than a life lived as a free, autonomous author of one's own story. The meaning offered by religion is often an illusion, a promise of eternal reward to make the finitude of our one and only life more palatable. But for many of us, it is precisely the finite nature of life that gives it its urgency and its preciousness. Ultimately, both the argument from morality and the argument from meaning are forms of motivated reasoning. They are attempts to justify a belief not because it corresponds to reality, but because it provides psychological comfort. This is an understandable human impulse, but it is not a rational one. Choosing to believe something because it makes you feel safe or purposeful is no different than a child believing there are no monsters under the bed simply by closing their eyes tightly. It may change how you feel, but it doesn't change what's actually there. Choosing the uncomfortable truth. So where does this leave us? We have seen that the very process of rational thought, built on evidence, logical consistency, and falsifiability, stands in direct opposition to the core tenets of religious faith, which is defined by belief in the absence of evidence. We've seen how religious claims are meticulously structured to be unfalsifiable, placed in a realm of special pleading, identical in form to celestial teapots and invisible dragons. We've examined how even the most powerful personal experiences are unreliable guides, easily explained by the known quirks of human psychology. And we've dismantled the arguments that religion is a necessary precondition for morality or meaning, revealing them to be little more than comforting but illogical justifications. The conclusion, then, seems inescapable. To hold a religious belief is to willfully or unknowingly step outside the bounds of rationality. It is to accept a different and demonstrably inferior set of rules for arriving at truth, but only for one specific, cherished area of one's life. A person can be a brilliant, rational scientist in the lab from Monday to Friday, and then on Saturday, accept claims about resurrected saviors and talking snakes on the basis of no evidence whatsoever. This doesn't make them a stupid person. It makes them a compartmentalized one. It demonstrates the profound power of childhood indoctrination, social pressure, and the deep human desire for comfort and certainty. For those of us at the God Mirage, embracing this conclusion is not a cause for despair, it is a cause for liberation. It is the shedding of a cognitive burden. It is the acceptance that I don't know is a far more honest and intellectually respectable answer than an unfalsifiable certainty. It means trading the false comfort of an imaginary friend for the genuine wonder of a tangible, knowable, if sometimes unforgiving, universe. It means taking full responsibility for our own morality and forging our own meaning in the one life we know for sure that we have. It's not an easy path, but it is an honest one. The journey away from faith is different for everyone. It can be a sudden snap or a slow, gradual erosion. What was the final straw for you? The specific contradiction, the failed prayer, the scientific discovery that made you begin to seriously question your own faith or the faith of those around you? Share your story in the comments. It's a powerful reminder that none of us are alone on this journey. And if this video has given you some food for thought, please like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next exploration into a world beyond belief. Thank you for watching.